Este es un slide muy general que lo tienen también en los materiales que describe la estructura de gobernanza del banco desde su órgano principal, que es la Junta de Gobernadores. Tenemos el Board of Executive Directors, el presidente del banco y las tres instituciones que están representadas el día de hoy acá. El BID, el BID Invest y el BID Lab. Creo que a estas alturas creo hay suficiente familiaridad, creo, de todos ustedes de cómo está estructurada la institución, pero estos son sus órganos más principales. La Asamblea de Gobernadores es al final el último ente responsable por la supervisión de las actividades del banco y de la administración. El Board of Executive Directors, que lo componen los directores y todos los otros miembros del directorio, ejecuta los poderes que han sido delegados por la Junta de Gobernadores hacia ellos y es responsable por la conducta y las operaciones del banco. Y tenemos el management, quien hace las operaciones de día a día, ¿no? Entonces, básicamente, estos son los principios más generales bajo los cuales se rige la institución. En esta diapositiva simplemente les presentamos, y como les dije, mucho de esto ustedes lo están viviendo día a día, algunos de ustedes por más de un año. Tenemos la estructura de cómo estamos organizados dentro del board. Como saben ustedes, tenemos 20 países, 28 países regionales, 20 prestatarios, que es un subgrupo de eso, y 20 no regionales, que hacen la composición de los 48 accionistas del banco. Tenemos los 5 standing committees, que todos ustedes, o la mayoría de ustedes están familiarizados, ya que los utilizan todo el tiempo, participan en ellos o los lideran. Y tenemos el de HORA, recursos humanos principalmente, el PEC, el Comité de Auditoría, Programación y Bufipol, que es fundamentalmente presupuesto, ¿no? Esos son los 5 standing committees del BID. El BID Invest está organizado un poco diferente, tiene el comité del IIC, que de alguna manera reemplaza todos los standing committees del BID, aunque con algunas excepciones, ya que auditoría y riesgo lo tenemos por separado. Estoy acá, el Legal Counsel me corregirá si no estoy diciéndolo exactamente. Tenemos el Executive Committee, que tiene un sistema de rotación, en el cual hay 4 directores que lo conforman y son los que se encargan de la aprobación de proyectos. Y tenemos un ad hoc committee, ¿no? Para casos especiales, para problemas de proyectos o algo que quizá Rosemary abordará brevemente, ¿no? Entonces, esa es un poco la forma como estamos organizados. Vamos a tratar durante estas 2 sesiones, hoy y el próximo viernes, de darles un pantallazo de toda la parte de cómo está organizado el banco en todas sus funciones. Van a venir funcionarios de todas las áreas del banco. Recuerden que cuando construimos esta agenda, yo les consulté, hicimos algunas pequeñas modificaciones para poner algunos temas adicionales. Vamos a tratar de cubrirlos todos en la medida que sea posible entre hoy y la próxima vez. Tienen ustedes entre sus materiales una agenda general en la que están detalladas todas las sesiones y creo que quizá no valdría la pena entrar en muchísimo detalle. La tienen ustedes a su disposición electrónica y físicamente. No sé si tenemos copias. Creo que no. Creo que decidimos hacer que esto iba a ser más paperless al final, pero de todos modos vamos a poder discutir todos los temas que habíamos acordado en las sesiones previas de preparación. Entonces, quizás sin más preámbulo, los invito a tomar sus sillas. Gracias por darnos el espacio. Y tomando ventaja de la presencia de nuestros 3 ejecutivos, y quizá vamos a cambiar al inglés, ya que todas estas preguntas están aquí en inglés, permítanme empezar con una pregunta general para los 3. Y dice, how have your experiences in many organizations, including some multilateral and the IDB group, influenced your approaches to development and international cooperation? Jordan.
Well, thank you very much for. Do I need a microphone? I need a microphone because we have people connected.
Yeah, because we have
virtually.
People online.
Right, 23 people. I remember. I was listening. So good morning, and thank you so much to the Secretary for inviting us to participate in this. I guess the question was what we bring from the past, from the other places where we've worked, and how does it affect our approach to development. Is that how?
Mhm.
So I, without going through my CV, I worked for about 8 years in the private sector before I joined the World Bank. Spent many years, perhaps too many years at the World Bank before coming here, but sort of worked through the institution of the World Bank back and forth between more analytical and technical positions as well as operational positions. I think probably like most of us, where we work in our 20s and early 30s has an impact, disproportionate impact on how we approach work. At least they're formative years, I think, for our work experience. And I think coming from the private sector, I worked in management consulting in transport and later in utilities and power and water utilities.
Let's go. Let's go.
Let's go.
Come, Riverside, come.
Could you please mute your microphones, those of you online?
I think she's asking me to skip the whole
I think
the whole CV thing. Yeah,
I think she did.
I feel like that was a message from God. Like, all right, get to the point, right? Now it was what? Yeah, of course, all of you. So let me take that as a hint. I was going to say that there's a certain client focus and deliverables focus that comes from having spent your 20s in the private sector, being beaten up by the pressures to deliver and to get paid and to please and perform for your clients. So that's something that I think was important for my own formative years. I think is sort of stuck with me. At least I like to think so in terms of general approach to work. In terms of approach to development, I guess over 25 years at the World Bank, I developed a view on the areas in which I worked, specifically largely infrastructure and sustainability, and strong views on what worked and what doesn't work in the area, and have struggled with how to take those views into my client work and into the institution. So I have found over the years that the way in which we focus on the trends of popularity in the rhetoric of how the multilateral development banks should play a role, for example, in intermediating in capital markets or in mobilizing capital, may or may not make sense client by client. I got brought into infrastructure during the privatization years, kind of a private sector oriented approach to policy, and have, I think, moderated my own views on what does work, at least come to respect the differences country by country of what sorts of approaches work for bringing the private sector into infrastructure. This is just one small example. I've worked and managed the processes, the parts of the World Bank that provided guarantees, that structured projects, and saw those financial instruments very useful in some cases, and sometimes not so important in other cases, or maybe beyond the point. And I think one thing I take from my experience, just to kind of wrap it up, like whoever was online was asking me to do, what I take from this is that the institution is important. The institution brings intermediation of knowledge and of financing. It's a delivery mechanism, but the point is not the institution. And sometimes the government is the intermediator, and the government is important. The government is going to implement, but the government's not the point of what we do either. It's the beneficiaries, it's the consumers, it's the people that we're trying to help, it's vulnerable populations. And I think, having spent enough time in development, I remind myself of this project by project. I have to remind myself of this project by project, whether we're sitting at the OPC and listening to how we are going to intercede, or I'm listening to a board discussion around the types of projects that we are going to be supporting. Does this intervention make sense, not just in this moment for the government or for the IDB or for the multilateral, but what will be the impact of the project. That's, I think, something that's become embedded in me, the confidence to say sometimes, well, from my experience, there's something missing in here, even if it's difficult to ask of the government or difficult to ask of the institution, or it's going to require a little bit of debate at the board. We have to ask this question. We have to ask this question. And they might be uncomfortable questions. And it can't be a religion about the role of the private sector or the role of the state. It's about the consumers. It's about the vulnerable populations. It's about the natural capital that we're trying to protect. It's about the greater goals of development. So I think that's something that I bring with me that comes from having worked for so long, perhaps too long, in the multilateral environment. Yeah.
Thank you, Jordan. Rosemary, same question for you. Would you like me to repeat the question? No?
I think I got it. First of all, good morning. It's very nice to see you. For the people who do not know me, as head of the Senate, I'm the General Counsel of IDB Invest. And I am here replacing James, unfortunately for you. But you will be seeing him. He sends his regrets. He's traveling in Brazil this week. And you will be seeing actually the entire IDB Invest management team next Friday for the onboarding session that we will be hosting that afternoon. So in response to your question, I've been at the IDB group for about 20 years, and also very much like Jordan. I don't want to get through the CV explanation, but I have worked for about 3 different categories of organizations. I started out in private practice at law firms, and I was very interested in development then, and worked in infrastructure and energy transactions for over 10 years. And I thought that development was about the design, the hardcore technical legal work that it takes to set up the financings for these large infrastructure transactions. And that's what I spent a lot of time doing. After that, I moved to a Finnish power company that developed projects all over the world. And I focused again a lot in Africa and Latin America. And there I learned that development was really about understanding the local markets and the local context and regulatory frameworks, and really understanding how people do business locally and bridging that gap between the needs of investors and lenders and the local requirements. And so when I came to the IDB group, I thought I had all of the tools that I needed to do my work here based on the prior experiences. And I'll never forget the first day that I was here, and I was, of course, I have to bring in this reference as the lawyer. I was reading the charter of the institution, and I was looking at the purpose, and it just hit me that the institution, the mission is about the development of the region. And I was no longer an institution that was driven by the money that it was going to make. It wasn't about the return on investment. It was a different focus. Of course, financial sustainability is important, but it's really about how do I incorporate the institution's mission in everything that we do. Yes, the projects need to be properly designed to manage legal and credit risk. Yes, we need to understand the local regulatory framework, the context for the local stakeholders. We need to bridge all of those gaps, but how do we bring the mission into everything that we do? And I learned, and this is something that I tell the lawyers all the time, and the teams that we onboard in IDB Invest, there are sort of 4 key things for us to focus on. One is the use of proceeds. Where do you put your money? This is about the institution's ambition, and you need to make sure that you reflect what it is that we want to do in terms of all of the different KPIs and targets that the institution is looking for. 2, environmental, social, and corporate governance. These are critical elements that have to be a part of our diligence and have to be a part of all of our documentation. We are stewards of sustainability as the institution, and we need to guard this for our region. 3, and this is something that we've been focusing on, particularly the last 5 to 10 years at the institution, transparency and integrity. And these have become huge issues that we focus on and that are part of the work that we do. And then the final thing that I've learned working both for the bank and IDB Invest was really about mobilization. And it's mobilization in terms of working with other development finance institutions, working with commercial banks, more recently institutional investors that we bring into a lot of our private sector transactions. But mobilization also starts, and partnerships start at home. And really the power of that is within the IDB group itself. I spent a lot of time working on the private sector window of the bank. working at IDB Invest, working for IDB Lab. The legal department of IDB Invest provides a lot of support to the IDB Lab operations. And some of the most powerful work that we do is when we do it together. And it is that synergistic relationship that I've learned can be very powerful in terms of moving forward with development.
Thank you, Rosemary. Let me now pass the word to Irene, our CEO in BitLab.
Thank you. Buenos días. Good morning, everybody. Bon dia. And great to be with Jordan and Rosemary here. Thank you, Gerardo, and the SEC team for organizing this and KIC. It's always a great opportunity to meet in different type of formats of discussion. So this is hopefully valuable for you, but it's for sure very valuable for us. So thank you for your time. I want to sort of build on what Jordan and Rosemary said. I think one aspect that I would highlight is that after about 27 years in development finance, keeping always a sense of optimism, but realistic optimism is super important. Suspend cynicism, not get too inward looking, because sometimes in this you can either lose hope or get too entrenched in the inner works of the institutions. And I worked for 20 years at the IFC. It's similar in that sense to any other large organization. And as Jordan was saying, and I think Rosemary alluded to, keeping front and center why we're here all the time, every morning. I mean, this is for the development and the impact and the clients, and keeping that client front and center. Secondly, suspend preconceived ideas. So let the what if always be there. What do I mean? Because I think as some of us, many of us actually, Gerardo included, and Jane for sure, Jordan, come from having been in very global organizations before dedicating ourselves to a single region. And it's been about 6.5 years for me now here at IDB. You have the advantage of understanding kind of other solutions that have been done elsewhere or global trends, and but it's never a one size fits all. The local context is incredibly important, and sometimes, very often, even more so now that we're living in a world of constant transformation and very rapid change and technological development. Solutions in certain countries can surprise you, and they can be way ahead of what even developed countries are doing. And for example, in financial inclusion, peaks in Brazil and what that has done to include many more people into the financial system is a good example. And finally, the third thing is to always, and this is more at the level of the teams that we work with, and you as the board facilitating that or supporting that can play a very big role. We need to nurture our teams, that people are really the essence of what we have here, and their growth and their stimulus and mobility across the organization is a great tool. I was very lucky at IFC that I could do that. In fact, even coming from the public side of the World Bank, then private sector at IFC in different roles, global director for an industry, regional director, and that kind of mobility and also leadership development for women in particular, I think it's also an extremely important thing that then affects a lot the way we can achieve our goals and development.
Thank you, Irene. Let me just ask 3 brief questions to our 3 executives here today. These are different ones for each one of you, and then we'll try to open it up for a dialogue. So for you, Jordan, what are the changes you would like to see at the IDB Group in order to strengthen the development effectiveness in its operations? Difficult one, huh?
No, easy. Thank you for that question. I guess there are 2 focuses that I have, and I think in a way, each component piece of the institutional strategy, and in a way, the direction of BidInvest 2.0 its eventual and potential capitalization are related to these in my mind. And this helps me to simplify or to order in my head all of these pieces that are going on at the same time, right? So we had a lunch about 2 months ago with the board, and somebody asked, like, how do you see the different pieces coming together when and I was reminded of that movie. I made a reference to it. Everything Everywhere All at Once is what it felt like. I don't know if you've seen the movie. It's very frenetic, but the title of it also kind of captures what we're doing. And now, actually, I guess because I've been here 3 months or 3.5 months, I'm starting to order the pieces. The way in which I order the pieces is to keep some objective fairly clear in my head. So on the mandate to focus on development effectiveness and impact means that we have to view the value of our operations slightly differently. Those operations are a mixture of financial instruments, public and private, as well as technical assistance and analytical work. What is it I feel like we have been missing in the multilateral world in defining impact? To me, we go into country strategies and we go even into, in a way, sector strategy, but particularly country strategies when we're negotiating what it is we're going to be doing on the ground, first at a very high level. We say there are pillars of support that we're going to offer. They're typically in some mixture of natural capital, now climate objectives, growth and productivity objectives, or macro management, depending on the country. We will have human capital improvements of some form or another. This is a way of organizing our structure and our dialogue with the governments at a very high level. If we have institutional strengthening and a couple of other things, mobilization, maybe they're cross-cutting themes. And then we have individual projects and results associated with each individual project. And what I think has been the weak point of the multilaterals is this middle space in between. There are development challenges that governments define on behalf of their people, particularly in region that is democratic. We have a blessing if you've ever worked in Cambodia and other countries where you're very concerned about the welfare of the people, but you don't know that the government that you're dealing with is actually so concerned about the welfare. For all of our struggles with democracy from north to south, we still have governments that are trying to find a way to articulate the concerns of the largest constituencies of their populations. So that's a blessing. How do we define that middle ground? Because if you try to organize our programs for effectiveness around human capital improvement, it's too much. Or around growth and productivity, it's too much. If you try to organize only around a water treatment plant or investment in school, it's too micro. It's easier to measure, right? And we become sometimes driven by the simplicity of measurement that I think brings us into the wrong place. And I say this as somebody with some economic training who has tried to demonstrate impact and worked in impact evaluation. You look for a counterfactual, you understand the invest, but at the end of the day, the result, if you want to measure the flow of water out of that treatment plant, that's something that you can measure. It's much harder to measure whether that treatment plant was part of an improvement in public health, just to choose one of those middle grounds, right? Maybe public health improvements is what a government really wants to concern itself with, or an area of territorial development. Minister Marcel, who himself has worked on clusters claves in Chile, when James and I were meeting with him, said, yes, I understand this idea to get to industry groupings or to productivity areas, but let's also not forget territories. Okay, what does that mean then if there is an area, there's the Chiapas, and there's going to be the Ceará or the Pernambuco, and in each country we have our areas that are struggling. What would it mean to focus on that? Okay, it means coordinating improvements in basic services, with access to those services, with the institutional arrangements. But maybe that's something that's that middle ground that we could land on. We define that explicitly. So I think the first challenge, I'm sorry, this is a bit of a round trip to get to the point, but for me, the greater goal is to find with the board members some sort of agreement, and in our programming processes, that middle ground. How do we focus on better resilience? So that might have a water resource component to it. It might have financial instrument component to it so that we can respond to emergencies or cover the risks of the poor and smallholders. It might have agricultural productivity related to it. Depends on the country and the economy. But that's a middle ground where we have component pieces, we have projects, we still monitor results, but we have to find a way to monitor at a slightly higher level, define that development objective for the IDB to have coherency in what we do, and for the governments to be able to explain why they are using the resources from these institutions. That's going to be hard to measure. That's going to bring in questions of attribution, but it's still, I think, the goal that we want to get to. So for me, that helps. And synergies is part of that. So I think you both mentioned synergies. I won't go into too much detail, but clearly the private sector branches of the multilaterals are going to grow in relative importance to the public sector side. That's something that is, I think, inevitable. Whatever happens with these capitalization pushes, it's appropriate. It's a different form of intermediation, but it's critical to development. How do we divide our labor and work closer together at the same time, I think is really important. And I have some ideas on that. I think that they're consistent. The IDB, in my view, is uniquely placed to benefit from the synergies that we need. We have common representatives. We have extremely close senior management. We have probably some governance issues, from what I understand, that still need to be strengthened. But they are on the table. I think the synergies question. So who's developing markets? The rules for exchange, property markets, energy markets, water markets, technology markets. What is the role of the public sector to make sure those investments happen over time? And are we supporting individual projects, of course, appropriately when there's a public good that needs to be covered? I think that's still yet to be strengthened and defined from the public sector side. I think that's will be a big part of our responsibility in the public sector. So those are the two themes that kind of keep me focused on where I think we need to go. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Great answer, Jordan. I think I've always been convinced that there are not enough amount public sector interventions we can do. The private sector has to be part of it. And this is a good segue into IDB Invest and Rosemary. So Rosemary, you heard a bit of the already Jordan alluding to the issue of synergies. So how do you think we can enhance synergies and teamwork between our institutions, particularly IDB, IDB Invest, including even IDB Lab as well, to better contribute to the development of the private sector in the countries of the region? I think I said
So clearly, this is an area that's top of mind for all of us. And just following up on what Jordan was saying, the governors set us off on a right path in 2015 at the time of the merge out, when they essentially made a decision to consolidate all of the private sector work into IDB Invest. So you have sort of the sovereign on one side, the non-sovereign on the other. But despite the separation, one of the key elements there was also the institutions need to work together, right? The synergistic approach is critical. And they set out a few concepts that we've been working on since then. One is joint country strategies, which we did not used to have before then. And the second was the single country representative, as mentioned by Jordan, compared to, for example, the World Bank, where they have different country reps. We have the one who represents the two institutions, and that has been very, very powerful for us. Now, having said that, and there was, so back then in 2015, there's a recognition that it's not just, you have public interventions, private interventions. Interventions are public and private, right? And so picking up on that, OVE did a recent evaluation in 2023 for us. I think it was 2021 for IDB Lab, and they said you still have areas for improvement, with which we agree. And I think, and here I'll mention a few that we're working on, and that you're seeing. You've been hearing these conversations with management on this particular issue. One is, I think IDB Investing needs to leverage more the country strategies and work more closely with the bank on the country strategies to make sure that the private sector interventions are more well-defined and anchored in those country strategies. To strengthen the role of the country representative. That's critical. The country reps have been key partners for us at all levels, but they can do more. And I think further defining the roles and responsibilities will be important. Jordan mentioned some of the upstream work that the bank can do. And here, I think, again, we can work collaboratively because defining and further strengthening the enabling environment for the private sector, again, is critical for us. And also us feeding back into the bank in terms of the policy work, what we're seeing, what makes sense, what works, what doesn't work when we're doing capital markets transactions, where are the gaps locally on some of the regulatory frameworks and maybe that can be strengthened on the private sector side. And also using the continuum of instruments more. I'll just give the one example, which is I always love, which is the IDB lab examples. They do incredible work in terms of early stage equity investments, and then the companies mature and they're ready for IDB Invest to sort of provide that next level of financing. And I think taking advantage more and more of that continuum is critical for us. And maybe just a couple more areas, GDI and climate, those are key KPIs for us, for the institution as a group. We have the new offices that are going to be created soon. And I think that those will be important for purposes of pushing that coordination. And finally, we can't forget about people, right? It all comes down to people. And it's about the culture, ensuring that, private sector is front and center for the entire group in terms of the types of work that everybody should focus on, and that there are incentives for collaboration, that there are incentives to exchange information and focus on innovation. And you've seen a lot of this already in some of the papers that we presented to you. The One IDB group is front and center in the IDB Invest value proposition, and also the synergy framework is something that you'll be seeing at the end of the month, the actual document.
Fantastic. It's always all about people and incentives. And Jordan may remember this idea for you of the single country representative may seem simple to you. It was a war. It was war at the World Bank and the IFC, and they did not implement it. And I think they're now looking carefully as to how it's working with us, and they are probably going to make changes as well. But just to give you an example. So, Irene, so all of this is an excellent discussion, but let me ask you about a key point that I think you lead an important part in this institution is how can we increase support to innovation processes in the countries of the region?
Thanks, Gerardo. I don't think there's a need to evangelize, and there are several board members who come from actually this field. I can see two of them at least here, but just to emphasize how key, more than ever, innovation and the ability to identify new business models and use technology that can have an inclusive and more inclusive impact, and not all the other negative unintended consequences that it could otherwise have in terms of translating current inequalities in the physical world in what are emerging digital solutions. We see that having a very deliberate approach to innovation is key. It can produce better jobs. It can definitely help change the means of production, which is one of the key levers if we do actually want to have a very big impact on climate. And again, it can be a very important tool for inclusion and for addressing some of the deeper challenges. And I think the synergies do come to play here, because we've talked about public policy and then enabling individual investments, but there's something in between, which is very much in the field of innovation, where there is a mix of actors. And as IDB Lab, we do work with obviously a lot of entrepreneurs and private sector, but more often than not, we do need to bring in academia, public sector to think about what are the policy implications that could help scale the solutions if they are successful. And And so having an institution under the umbrella of the group that is specialized in taking this type of risk, in being comfortable with failure, but ready to help scale the solutions that actually work and can become mainstream and very, very large parts of the change, as we've seen with a third of the unicorns that indirectly we've supported and are now the drivers of a lot of the economy in the region, or as we have seen with changes in, for example, how we care for the poor and vulnerable population that is aging rapidly and doesn't have innovative health solutions to have better care at home. Solutions like that require orchestrating, not just investing in a point solution, but orchestrating actors that can make sure that once the solution is proven to be successful, it can actually scale. And our 32% scalability score is okay, but we, I think, are in a very good position, better than ever, to increase it by being very deliberate from the design of the solutions in what are the prerequisites for IDB Invest to be ready to grow those companies, for the public side to either be ready to finance the long term if it's successful and requires public sector intervention, or do the policy changes. And we have a lot of growing examples in this. Anacare in Mexico is a good one of this last challenge of elderly population. But back to the single rep, given that these have to be rooted in the local context, their role is fundamental. And at the more regional level, Amazon Forever or the Caribbean, the approach that we're building together for the Caribbean, one of our colleagues is going to be next week in the Caribbean Investment Forum, are also ways to have perhaps that approach of the middle ground that Jordan was referring to.
Thank you, Irene. It's all about innovation and scalability at the end, right? So there you have it. I think we thought of giving you 3 big ideas of the development effectiveness of the impact the institution can have and should have, the way we use our different parts through synergy, and the way we try to innovate, scale, replicate new ideas. These are 3 basic elements, I think, of the overall strategy you're hearing and that you guys are crafting and deciding bit by bit and preparing with the administration.